Good.
Hi everybody, welcome along to Banter at St. Augustine's Church for CultureTech and for Culture Night. Please welcome Hannah Donovan, co-founder of This Is My Jam. Let's start with the easy question, Hannah. Your CV, your background. Like, what led you to This Is My Jam? What were you doing beforehand?
Sure. Well, right before I started This Is My Jam with my co-founder Matthew Ogle, I was working at Last FM. And so I guess it was a little bit, in part, born out of some of the ideas that we had there that we weren't able to do at the time. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, you keep talking, and I'll jump in.
You love it when I keep talking.
I know from kind of like it's just in researching you that you normally kind of give presentations at tech conferences. So this is obviously it's a tech conference. But this isn't really kind of a tech conference-y kind of thing. So feel free to talk.
I can keep talking for as long as you need. Yeah. So before I worked at Last FM, before I was their head of creative, I actually worked agency side. I am originally from Canada. That's where my accent is from. So I worked for an agency, a creative agency in Toronto, and we did a lot of stuff there that was sort of like youth oriented, a lot of like brands and music, lifestyle, fashion, that kind of thing. I mean, I've always loved music. I'm a musician myself, and my dream was to be able to combine my two passions, which are design and music. So that's really what led me.
Yeah. So what were you doing at Last FM then as a designer?
Well, I was hired very early on when it was still a really small team, and they were looking for somebody who could really just do everything at the time, because they needed someone who could help not only with how they projected their brand from a graphic design perspective, but also help build the product from an interaction design perspective, like digital product design, and then eventually grow and lead a team. So I did all those things. I mean, it was over the course of about 5 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like, you know, during that time, you obviously kind of developed some ideas about how music tech was presented.
Yes.
You know, and it's really weird. There's a quote you kind of gave from a. Oh yeah, don't worry.
No.
I love doing research. You kind of like me. You want to kind of create the opposite of spreadsheet music. Tell us about what your thoughts are on spreadsheet music. What that refers to.
Sure. So spreadsheet music, that was actually, it'll come to me, his name in a second. Anyway, I've always been very interested in the visual aspect of music. Obviously, I'm a designer, right? So like, I love giant album art. I love, fold out things in the physical world. And in the digital world, I think sadly, music has been kind of underrepresented, except for in the video format, because music is only as visual as you make it, and it's just when you turn it into digital music is only as visual as you make it. And so one of the things that I was dealing with at Last FM in particular is when you just have the audio, it's like, well, you need to include some kind of visual to go with it. You need to take that upon yourself as the creator of that digital product. Otherwise, it's just going to be text and sound. And, at the time, that was largely what was out there, really. I mean, a lot of the digital products that existed sort of based their interfaces loosely, I would say, on iTunes, because that was, the forerunner in the digital music market. And, I mean, iTunes still kind of looks like a spreadsheet today.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, they've definitely made some updates in the last couple of versions around albums to make them feel a little more visual and friendly, but it's nothing like looking at my record collection. It looks like Excel.
I mean, the first time I came across This Is My Jam, I mean, it was the aesthetic which kind of pulled me in. I mean, it was two things. One was the aesthetic, the way it looked. Second of all was the fact that like it was limited to one tune. So This Is My Jam is basically an online service that allows you to say, this is the tune I'm digging at the moment. This is the one track at the moment I'm digging. Maybe talk to us a little bit about like Hannah, about like the thought process behind that. Was this a Last FM project that came out of Last FM, kind of like water cooler moments?
A little bit.
You signed NDA, so you can't really kind of go into that. But like, talk a little bit about like the thinking behind it.
Sure. I mean, what I can say about what last if I'm informed that This Is My Jam product is that it was many years of working in music, learning how it worked, really learning the industry, going deep on that domain, and having a lot of pub conversations with my colleagues about where we thought digital music was headed and what was missing and what we were missing in our lives and all that stuff. And the thing that we felt like we were really missing, that my co-founder Matthew Ogle, laid out to me was when we started working on the project was there's still no good way to share your favorite song right now. And the favorite song bit, I can go into that in more for you in a sec, but just to answer your first question about its aesthetic and everything, was that we really wanted to create a place that celebrated songs. That was another thing that we felt like wasn't happening. Most music services were really focused on either albums or playlists or radio. And there wasn't really any place at that time that we felt was really putting focus on just one song. Sort of the same way you would with like a 45 or something.
Yeah.
Like this is it, and make it really big and beautiful and transform that song from something from just sort of like, one line or maybe even like a waveform to something that's like, this is a full screen experience. This is, a complete visual around this piece of music. This is what this person thinks about it. This is a story or a little note that they've written about why it's meaningful to them. And sort of all that rich context that we felt was missing.
So I mean, like, but the great thing about it was like, by concentrating just on one song, it was almost like, it reminded me of being back in the playground in many ways, because you were shouting about like, this is the one song you've got to hear right now, and it just took away an awful lot of the choice. I mean, both Steve Carson and Jamie Bing were both kind of talking about choice when they were talking earlier on, and like, with something like This Is My Jam, it kind of cleared out all that clutter and it brought it down to one particular track,
Yeah.
So I mean, it must have been kind of very interesting when you put it live to see the fact that there was an audience out there who got it and who were prepared to kind of roll with it.
Yeah, I mean, pressing the button on the alpha release and sending out emails to all our friends in the industry was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. But luckily, they liked it, and we had a hunch they would. And here's why. One of the things about music discovery is that it's really sort of hard to onboard people in that process. You need to first ask them kind of a very specific question about their music taste so that you can start recommending them things. And this is a problem that pretty much every music service has. And so a lot of them have tried to solve it, and at Last.fm we tried to solve it too with things like bootstrapping in data from another music service that you might already have a profile on, or like tell us what genres you like, or presenting you with some music, like here's some things, do you like some of them? And all of those have some problems because, for instance, if you import all your music listening history, the stuff that you were listening to 6 years ago is not your music taste today. That's a huge problem. Presenting you with stuff to sort of say, I like this, I don't like that, that can really put people off, because it's like, what? You think my music taste is this?
I don't trust the algorithm.
Exactly. And so the best way is to just, I think, be very unassuming about people's music taste and ask them a really focused question. If you ask people, like, what kind of music do you like, you always get the same vague answer, which is, oh yeah, I like pretty much everything except for like death metal, opera, and country or something like that, right? Or
you just read my mind.
Right? That's accordions. So what we discovered, and I found through interviewing a lot of users doing user research, is that if you ask people a more specific question about music, you get kind of a better answer. And so I was sort of scratching at this problem from the design user research angle, and my co-founder Matthew Ogle was scratching at this problem from the pub angle, and he would always go to the pub and talk to people about music. I mean, we both did, but in particular he would say, which bands should I listen to right now, or what band should I listen to? And he would always get some answers, and he'd stick them into his phone and try and remember those, and then check the bands out later. We've all done this. And at some point, he started asking people, like, what song should I listen to instead of the bands? And two things happened when he asked that question. One is the quality of the recommendations went way up. And secondly, the conversations that he had around the music went way up. And that was when we kind of hit on it, and we were like, yeah, you know what? This is what we need to do. It needs to be really focused, And we made it our mission to sort of say that you give us one thing you love and we'll help you find some other things that you love based on that really focused piece of information. And as we worked with this really focused piece of information, we started calling it, this piece of data, this song that you love, we started calling it notable data, because it's worth so much more than the type of data that we were accustomed to working with in a service like Last.fm or any other service out there that uses big data or collaborative filtering or something like that. So the kinds of data I'm talking about are a listen or a play or like a check-in or like a location point or something like that. Something that may happen passively or actively, but you need a lot of it to start inferring some information about this person's tastes. Whereas with something like a favorite song, it's like so, there's so much heart attached to that. And especially when people also include some imagery or some writing about why they love this song, and then of course all the connections out from that song to the other people who love it too, you wind up with this really rich piece of data that you can actually do a ton with very quickly.
Okay, I suppose this will be the kind of the technical part of the talk. In that,
Sure.
a lot of music. You talked there about how music services are currently using data and what kind of data they're looking for. That song thing is a very heart and soul thing. I mean, how hard has it been to turn that into kind of I suppose the kind of marketable data you can kind of use to attract investors and people like that?
Mm-hmm. So it took us some time, actually. We just released the first, lit up the first version of our song graph, we're calling it, which is based on 2 million jams. So 2 million times people have told us their favorite song. And it took a while to get to that number, and if you work in technology, you'll think, oh, that's not a very big number, but it is, because every time we get that number accrues, it's someone saying, this is my favorite thing right now, which is, a hugely meaningful thing. It took time though, because also another thing that we were experimenting with at the same time was trying to do something that was sort of like less is more was really our approach. We felt when we started it that there were just so many services that were competing for our attention, really trying to get us into twitchy habits to constantly check back at them. There was this endless feed of information all of a sudden across every single service that I used. And we were just this doesn't feel like the pace of music. Because, how often do you really sit down and listen to new music? Maybe once a week or something like that, on a Sunday, when I'm sitting at home with my nice stereo system and speakers, I'll listen to some new music. Often I listen to it in snatches throughout the day as well because of my job, but I'm aware that I'm a vast corner case here. Most people, at the most, they might do this once a week. And you also need certain things. You need headphones, you need some speakers plugged in, you need at least 3.5 minutes. It's the average length of a song. And so this sort of feed of information that we would see in others, what I would call social services like Facebook or Twitter, that a lot of music services at the time were trying to move a model into that model, rather I should say, felt way too fast. That's the pace of chat. Yeah. That's the pace of speaking. What we're doing right now, that's something that I can consume very quickly within a few seconds. And music doesn't happen at that pace. It's slower. It was actually really interesting to hear you guys talking about books right before this talk, because that's again something that it has a very different pace. And when you build a digital service around a specific medium like that, you need to be aware of this pace. So it took us some time to accrue all that data, because we didn't, nag people to come back every second and post a new jam. We only wanted your favorite song when it was really your favorite song. So what we do is we based it around the time span of a week. And some people come and post it every day. Some people post every few days. I think the average is 3.5 or 4, something like that. And some people only post once a week. I normally post once a week. And some people don't even post that often. They have a new favorite song that they really love every few months, or maybe it's twice a year, and that's okay. That was something that we wanted to create space for. That's something we felt really strongly about.
Okay, so that's a key differential between like This Is My Jam and something like SoundCloud or Spotify or whatever. It's very selective. I kind of want to bring it back to your initial expertise, which is kind of design, and like looking at the design of music services. And over the last couple of days before this, I would use Spotify now and again. I have a bizarre kind of listening system in that like I have a lot of music on that thing called CDs still, and it still comes with CDs, so there's still a cover around. But I was looking at the music services that are out there, and design-wise, I mean, it's just they're very clunky still. I really feel that like there hasn't been enough, I suppose, like importance, time, patience, and largesse given to design. As a designer who's designed a system that's kind of like getting thumbs up for its design elements, what's your take on the kind of current design hinterland when it comes to music technology?
Well, I would say, first of all, you have to give these designers a lot of credit because working in music is really hard. That's the first thing I would say. And I don't like to ever criticize until I know the context around what went into the project, how much time the person had, those kinds of constraints. And I think I should point out that like music has a ton of constraints. Like often you're working with really, really, really messy data. Like music metadata is just, that's a whole conversation in itself, but like imagine remixes, mixtapes, hip hop, classical music, like it gets messy. The other thing is, getting imagery, which we talked about a little bit at the beginning, like sourcing an image API for where you're going to get anything like album art, picture of the artist, what are you going to use, what makes sense. So those things are kind of difficult. The other thing is that music is constantly changing. The landscape is always changing and the industry is always changing. So as a designer, you have to be incredibly responsive to this. And sometimes what you're working on one day doesn't even make sense in a week because someone will have come out with a competing product and you need to completely switch everything around and do something totally differently. So what I would say is that it's a really hard space to work in. And I think you're right, there's still so much more innovation that needs to be done in design. I also feel though like we've gotten through maybe the hardest part of it. Like we're through the worst now. Now it's about to get much easier and much better, and that's just because the industry has matured a lot. There's much better day-to-day services and APIs out there, and also designers are becoming more savvy, and there's starting to become designers like myself who have actually spent a significant amount of time in the music industry and really understand all its quirks. And I think that's something that is very important too. Like you can't necessarily just take one designer or one engineer or product person for that matter out of one industry and plunk them into the other just because it's tech.
Yeah.
Like that's ridiculous. I mean, I used to say that I work in music tech. Now I just say I work in music because technology is just the way by which I get my job done. And the kind of domain knowledge that you build up in the music industry, if I was to go work in, I don't know, like a digital product around hotels or something tomorrow, like I wouldn't know the first thing about it.
Okay, you said something very interesting there, Hannah, that I want to come back to, which is you kind of saying about how hard it was to source images and all that. Do you kind of find that maybe music isn't as design-led as we often are led to believe?
That's a really interesting question. I think it is actually very design-led. Maybe not by design, but in a very beautiful, messy, chaotic way. Music is always something that has had a lot of visuals attached to it, but not necessarily from sort of a clean promoted angle. Sure, of course there is for the big stars, but a lot of the aesthetic around music comes out of things like what a particular nightclub feels like, or what sort of fashion people are wearing when they're listening to a kind of genre of music, or just the aesthetic that you get from people hiring some random person to make their posters, and then that winds up defining a particular era or a couple of years worth of aesthetic. So it's all those things, what I would call pop culture. That's where music's aesthetic is completely intertwined, and I think that's where a lot of services kind of miss out on that feeling that gives it the heart and soul that you get in the physical world.
Right. I suppose that, like, I want to ask some questions now around, say, you know, the London technology scene at the moment. You know, I mean, you know, this My Jam kind of grew out of that kind of Silicon Roundabout kind of space. You know, and like, it just strikes me there's been you mentioned there the fact that you don't say anymore you work in music tech, you work in music. You know, that power shift seems complete now. That, like, you know, people kind of people kind of seem to have a happy medium between music and technology, that they realize they need both sides of the equation. Like, have you noticed, you know, any kind of arrogance kind of coming into the tech world in the last couple of months?
Arrogance. I mean, you know, there's always stuff like that going on. What I would say is that it does feel like it's shifted a lot, and that there's more hangers-on now, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean, but I'd like maybe expand a little bit on that.
I think that people are interested in technology as a place that they can make money.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean by that. You basically mean there's been what we call a lot of tire kickers around.
Yeah, there's more people that are, you know, talking the talk instead of making the shit. I feel like these days.
Yeah. Okay, but like, you know, but like, obviously, you know, that's quite distracting for the makers, because I mean they want to actually get on and actually create something. So, whereas instead these people are just looking for a quick buck or a quick value out of it, you know. So, like, you know, how hard is it for the actual genuine music players to kind of ignore these people with deep pockets?
I'd say it's really easy. I mean, you just, you know, don't pay attention to that stuff. I mean, I'm like way too busy to go to all those events and things that are happening and stuff. And when I do, you know, you just find the people that are doing good work. I mean, it's like I kind of got a radar for it, I guess.
Yeah. You've an interesting kind of like career trajectory as well, Hannah, because you worked in agencies before you kind of came over and started working at Last FM. You know, do you ever kind of like think to yourself, okay, I could go back to that, or are you quite committed now to like the tech side?
That's a really interesting question too. You know, there's pros and cons to both. Something that I really miss from working in an agency environment is that you get to work on multiple projects, and I find that as a creative person, being able to switch between things can sometimes be really useful, because when you get stuck on one thing, the best thing to do is go work on something else. Yeah. You know, that always gets me unstuck. And so that's a bit more difficult when you work on one thing long term. But then, of course, you know, the pro to that is that you do get to work on that one thing long term, and you get to really get invested in it and create a lot of different iterations, because usually the first time you try something, it doesn't work. I mean, sometimes you get lucky, but often there's a lot of refinements that need to be done. And you know, for instance, like the posting a jam flow, we've reworked that now at least 3 times in a big way, and countless times in smaller ways where we've tinkered on it. And I think there's something, as agencies really get their hands around building digital products, I think there's a big question there, which is how do you do that sort of long-term maintenance, not even maintenance, I wouldn't call it, but like improvement. You know, how do you do that kind of stuff long-term? Because usually it's like fixed length contracts. And so that's what's kind of steered me away from going back to an agency, is that while I do really like the variety of work and the people are great, and I actually really enjoy some of the work ethic of the culture too. It's very different to that of a startup. I struggle to understand how you build something long term there. I think there's definitely people that are working on that problem right now, and I'm sure we'll see. We'll see it shake out soon.
It's interesting there, as you talked about kind of like maintenance, and you kind of talked about like, you know, what the agency model could offer you. And one thing you were quite vocal on with kind of like sometimes you have to draw animals was about creative burnout. You know, I mean, like is that a problem in tech? Is it a problem that people don't recognize?
Definitely, I would say it's a huge problem in tech, and it's in tech. Well, it's fueled by the industry just, I think, not being very aware of it. I mean, it's a very, very fast-paced industry. It's very technology-driven, so it means a lot of engineering culture. And I think that, you know, while engineers do a very, very creative job, sometimes they don't get the training in school, for instance, around the sort of like creative process that I think that they should. That is something that I've noticed with a lot of my peers who are engineers. And I think it would do engineers some great service if they would take a few more creative classes in uni, like on how to, for instance, run or be involved with a critique session, or just understand your own personal creativity a bit better. Things that, you know, I had to learn through being marked on how I kept a sketchbook and stuff like that, that I think is designers are slightly better equipped for when they come out of school. Those are the kinds of skills that I've had to teach engineers along the way, which I'm happy to do, of course. But
are they receptive to that, Hannah?
You know, like not always at first, but we get there in the end.
Cool.
Sometimes they really are, but I think, you know, that sort of understanding of your creative self is the first thing that you need to avoid that kind of burnout. And I mean, I wasn't super lucky in that respect either, but I think that because it's such an engineering-driven culture, you know, and it's really fast-paced, everyone sort of, you know, just works really late nights and weekends all the time, and it's very young and very, very young as well.
It's also very male.
Yes. And it's very homogenous.
Yeah.
And you sort of see a lot of people that get into a cycle of, you know, non-stop work until they just burn out.
I mean, homogenous is a very good way to describe it, because I remember last year here at CultureTech having a conversation with Mark Nagorski, who runs CultureTech, and I just was seeing all these people walking around. It's mostly kind of VCs and investors, and they all look the same. They were all wearing kind of blazers with jeans, and I was just going, man, if I got to wear a blazer and jeans, and it's like, it just seems to be quite, the industry seems extremely cookie cutter in that, like, everyone looks the same.
Yeah, it is. I actually have partial face blindness. Like, I have a hard time recognizing people's faces, and so it's just unbelievably awful for me at conferences, because all I see are like all these white men with beards, and I can't tell them apart. They come up to me and they're like, "Hi, Hannah, it's so great to see you," and I'm like, "Oh God, I'm gonna have to ask you your name. I have no idea who you are."
That's a good way to end it. Hannah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
That was great. Thank you very much. That's perfect.
It was really great. Thanks for the questions.